war profiteering.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, January 31st, 2019. My name is Michael Brooks, and I'm Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Lori Wallach. She's the director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. We're talking about Trump's NAFTA. What's in it? Where does it need to go from here from a labor, environmental perspective? What to ask specifically of the 2020 candidates to move to a trade regime based on solidarity and values and not corporate exploitation. She's going to be joining us. Foxconn, speaking of corporate exploitation, is reconsidering its Wisconsin factory after receiving billions in subsidies to go there. It looks like that's not working out too well. The European Union has figured out an alternative economic mechanism to bypass U.S. sanctions against Iran, as that hopefully will go into effect soon. The Trump administration blew up the Iran deal, which the Iranians are still actually observing. CNN, in a rebuke to Trump, showcases Mitch McConnell's urging of troop deployments, troop increases in Syria and Afghanistan. Some scumbag on scumbag violence there. Of course, Mitch is wrong. We do need to draw out of both countries almost, keyword almost entirely in the case of Syria, where we need to maintain solidarity with the Kurds. Venezuela continues to descend into chaos. Maduro is deploying secret police units in a crackdown as the United States threatens military action. And Guaido gets an op-ed space in the New York Times to declare himself president, essentially. I look forward to my offer next. Indigenous movements and unions march against austerity in Ecuador as the sellout Lenin Moreno government continues its undoing of the leftist legacy of its predecessor. AMLO declares the war on drugs over. Brazil's prosecutors, who in a vicious move against political prisoner Lula da Silva broke Brazilian law by not allowing him to attend his brother's funeral, have now acknowledged publicly for the first time what everybody else knows, which is that he's not, quote-unquote, a normal prisoner, which is one way, I guess, of referring to a political prisoner. ICE ran fake colleges to target undocumented immigrants, proving that evil does really exist. And the Homeland Security chair raises the possibility of a subpoena for the Department of Homeland Security chief. Ocasio-Cortez is set, along with Edward Markey in the Senate, to unveil Green New Deal legislation. And Howard Schultz, still steaming ahead here. Probably should have done this a little while ago. He deleted tweets that he tweeted out of a column calling Warren Pocahontas and Harris shrill. Interesting. If I was Howard Schultz, I would have a little bit of a timing conversation with Bill Burton and Steve Schmidt. That probably should happen a little while ago. I mean, I know this pisses people off, but I am not above Warren-based jokes around the Native American thing. That one's really lame. And Kamala Harris, who I have plenty of criticisms of, I actually would recommend the new Woke Bros drop today. Waz and I did a deep dive on her, as well as Howard Schultz and Davos. I mean, I think it's no mystery what I think for her political profile. But to hear her as shrill would be like, I don't even know, like, actually the only comparable example, I guess I'll make it serious, would be like the type of people who would say, like, Barack Obama just sounds so angry.
Yeah.
Like, you're hearing yourself.
Yeah,
and
like,
what you're hearing from yourself is sexism when you say that.
Yeah, like, how do we get the least benefit of the doubt right now that we're not just being sexist? I know, shrill.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. That just isn't, I mean, look, because sometimes, frankly, like, Hillary Clinton received a huge amount of sexism. But is it an accurate statement to say that she is not charismatic in the way that that word is traditionally used and understood? Yes. And some people don't like to acknowledge that reality. But, like, Kamala Harris shrill. Okay.
She's so emotional.
She is none of these things. And actually, I think when I read about and if you look at the New York Times piece on her prosecuting record called Kamala Harris was not a progressive prosecutor, and you read about her arguing to uphold an almost certainly false conviction, I felt a lot more emotional than she did about it. That was some cold-blooded stuff.
It's on her period.
So anyway, that's what Howard Schultz said. Howard Schultz said, on the one hand, you have belligerent men who talk about assaulting women and putting children in cages. And then on the other hand, Kamala Harris is on her period, which is why I need to run as an independent man with a well-balanced nervous system. All right, let's make fun of Howard Schultz some more. This is going to be all fun and games unless the Democratic Party nominates Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, potentially even Sherrod Brown. And then he will continue his race, and they will pump a huge amount of money into a delusional oligarch campaign, which will not perform well but could serve as a spoiler. Here he is on MSNBC, though. I mean, until that event, I think we all can definitely, just keep laughing and dunking away. Here he is talking about his two favorite presidents. One favorite president, it makes sense. His reasons for it are hilarious. And the other favorite president, well, he should keep that president's name out of his mouth.
Republican president in the past 50 years, best M.
I have great respect for Ronald Reagan. Just came from the Ronald Reagan Library. The thing that I took away from Ronald Reagan, aside from all of the wonderful things he did, that really struck me, especially compared to the current person who is despicable in the Oval Office. Ronald Reagan never took his jacket off in the Oval Office in 8 years. Why? Because of his respect and the dignity of the office. That needs to be restored.
How much?
Democrat, FDR.
How much?
Resistance, MLK. That's exactly right. He may have voted against my birthday and supported apartheid, but he never wasn't snazzy in the Oval Office. I heard that Nancy told him that the astrologist said that he would be cursed if he took his jacket off. But nonetheless, he did it, and it was the right thing to do. Now, his other favorite, besides the laughable Ronald Reagan line, was FDR. And I believe it was FDR's birthday. Was it yesterday? I think we had an FDR birthday recently. And I say what I always say about FDR, which is that we know, and there's serious critiques to be had of the really obvious things like the internment, his appeasement of segregationists in his party, and also a critique from the left. We know all these things, and it's important. And then conversely, I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I mean, this guy was a very successful president, and did a lot of good things for a lot of people, things that are still benefiting people today. Like in 2000, like his 1930s legacy has a more positive impact than almost anybody in modern politics in 2019. And here he is. This is the economic royalist speech, and think of this as an indirect response to the coffee guy.
Today we stand committed to the proposition that freedom is no half and half affair. If the average citizen is guaranteed equal opportunity in the polling place, He must have equal opportunity in the marketplace. These economic royalists complain that we seek to overthrow the institutions of America. What they really complain of is that we seek to take away their power.
In other words, Howard Schultz, keep my name out of your punk mouth before I have to take my cane and slap the taste out of it. My wife will kick your ass too. Now go get us an overpriced, overfat, disgusting latte, which we will buy grudgingly so that we may use the bathroom at the airport.
Yeah, Howard is just an utterly contentless person. Like, he might want to make it look like he's creating some kind of new synthesis of like all the greatest ideas of the past. But like, no, you picked two pictures off of Wikipedia and you said, I like this guy and I like this guy. Like, it reminds me of Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to paraphrase the end because it's kind of long here, but he wrote, "The power of capitalist realism derives in part from the way that capitalism subsumes and consumes all of previous history. One effect of its system of equivalence, which can assign all cultural objects, whether they're religious iconography, pornography, or Das Kapital, a monetary value, flattening them all into decontextualized artifacts."
Well, and that's why when Hillary cited FDR as her favorite politician and Bernie cited Winston Churchill as his favorite foreign leader, it was kind of embarrassing for everybody.
Yeah, right. Everybody was just like, everybody's wrong here and being really ridiculous. But to paraphrase Mark Fisher further, how about we synthesize my fist on your stupid face? If I could have designed public housing programs that made it illegal for someone who grew up in one of them to open up a overpriced bean chain that exploited laborers in the developing world and those at home, I would. Don't ever mention my name again, Howard.
FDR probably opened up a lot of those markets for coffee beans.
That is probably true. That is probably true.
Good neighbor.
That is true, although the illicit history that we did with Derek Davison was, and it was very practical, right? Like, Roosevelt was actually decent on anti-colonialism in some ways because the baton was being passed from a different world order, from the British Empire to the American Empire, which is branded differently.
Right.
If painful heartburn or acid reflux keeps you up at night, try MedCline. It's a new natural solution It's a new natural solution to a problem that affects thousands of Americans. MedCline is a comfortable acid reflux pillow system for your bed that keeps you in the best sleeping position for natural relief. No more sliding down a wedge or putting blocks under your bed frame. No more dangerous medication and no more suffering. The MedCline system is available in 3 sizes and has a patented arm pocket so you can sleep comfortably on your side without pressure on your shoulder. The soft, supportive body pillow keeps you from rolling to your back so you can get the rest you deserve. If you're suffering with nighttime heartburn, you have to try MedCline tonight. With their 100-day relief guarantee, you have nothing to lose. The system ships free with this special offer and comes complete with a full set of pillowcases. For more information, visit goodnightheartburn.com or call 1-800-610-1607. Enter the code MAJORITY at checkout for fast, free shipping. That's goodnightheartburn.com or call 1-800-610-1607. 1-800-610-1607 to learn more and try MedCline today. We will be right back with Lori Wallach on the Majority Report. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Lori Wallach. She's the director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch and a 25-year veteran of congressional trade battles, starting with the 1990s fight over NAFTA. I did want to say, I just because it's in your bio, I mentioned in the office this morning during prep that when I was about 15 or 16 years old, and I went to one of my first, major protests, and it was a World Bank IMF protest, I think in 2000. And I remember I was probably like reading some of your articles in The Nation. And so it's cool to be talking with you. Thanks for being here.
I was only 12 when I wrote those, so.
No, I know. You were precocious. You were known as, they called you the child prodigy of global trade critiques. I remember that. So it was embarrassing, actually, because I said, my God, she's 12 years old. I'm 5 years older than her, and she's already writing great critiques of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs in The Nation.
And now here we are with NAFTA getting renegotiated.
Can you give us a history of NAFTA before we get to the renegotiations? Where does this trade agreement come from? Where did it start? What was agreed to in the 90s?
The short version of it is that NAFTA effectively hijacked the concept of trade agreements and used that branding to implement a set of binding international rules that created a whole set of new rights and powers for corporations and limited government rights to regulate on a lot of things unrelated to trade. So when Senator Elizabeth Warren talks about corporate rigged trade agreements, that is precisely accurate, in that prior to NAFTA, trade agreements dealt with cutting border taxes, called tariffs, on physical goods that would cross borders, so an imported product. With NAFTA, the corporations who, under U.S. procedures, had a special insider role. There were more than 500 official corporate advisors to the NAFTA negotiations, and it was a closed-door process. Congress and the press and public were locked out. They effectively hijacked that process. No one was paying a lot of attention to. Border taxes. Fell asleep thinking about it.
Right.
To insert a whole different agenda. So NAFTA became this incredibly elegant Trojan horse, where, for instance, the pharmaceutical industry inserted new monopolies, anti-competitive rules in a free trade agreement to give them protections against competition from generic medicines to keep drug prices high. Or the agribusiness industry stuck in rules that got rid of the policies that had been in place for 50 years that said imported food had to meet U.S. standards, not anymore under NAFTA. And all of the companies that were looking to outsource production to exploit low wages in Mexico got a whole set of special investor protections and privileges that basically made it much less risky and cheaper to outsource jobs. And that whole package got sold as trade. And the results, sadly, have been even more devastating than the coalition of environmental and labor and family farm and consumer groups and progressive Democrats who fought NAFTA in the early 90s predicted.
So can we just, we'll get back to specifically NAFTA in a second, but I mean, this is also part of a whole kind of broader set of global trade regimes that were particularly, prevalent in the 90s. Like I'm thinking of GATT, General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, but then also very similar to the Obama administration pushing TPP. And I want to just put one other thing on the table just briefly, because your work, I think, always showed this, because you were and are so good at basically, translating technical things that seem really boring, but actually have a big impact on everybody's life. And there's this new scholarship from Quinn Slobodian, and I'm forgetting the name of his book, but his argument is basically that when we accept the neoliberal or laissez-faire idea that they're advocating for less government, less interference in the market, that's a fundamental misconception, because all of these trade systems and all of these the rules of the road of things like the WTO are highly bureaucratic, highly technical, highly government involved. They're just written in a way that explicitly benefits, like you were just saying, the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm wondering first, I mean, does that kind of make sense as a way of understanding the thing, the broader thing? And then, like, how do all these trade systems fit together? Is it really just like writing the rules of the road to benefit the corporate sector across the planet?
That's it. In fact, Quinn's description of it is exactly right. It's not that the agreements are eliminating regulation and government interference. They are rather imposing one-size-fits-all, a set of rules that explicitly privilege big corporations and stick it to working people, the environment, and frankly, undermine the principle and practice of democracy, because trade agreements shouldn't be locking in the parameters of what permissible domestic policy is on access to affordable medicines, on the regulation of banks, on the inspection of food for safety. Those are issues we need to fight out in Congress, local issues about land use and zoning, like agreements like NAFTA try and make sure that, for instance, a community can't limit big box stores. I mean, why is any of that in a trade agreement? That should be fought out at city council with everyone who's going to live with the results involved. So the whole idea of basically hijacking the trade agreements was to create these Trojan horse instruments that would shift decision-making away from those who would be affected and lock in rules that privileged global corporations. And, speaking of good books, Bob Kuttner has a new book out that talks specifically about the fundamental incompatibility of these kind of rules and democracy. It's called Can Democracy Survive Global Capitalism? And it sounds like it's a companion to Quinn's book.
Right.
Because he basically points out, yes, of course we should have trade rules. Trade can be good. But we have to extract all of this corporate protectionism from the trade agreements. And this is, by the way, to jump back now to the future, this is exactly where what progressive organizations and unions and Democrats in Congress are now fighting for with the NAFTA renegotiation differs with what Trump's vision is. Trump's worldview about this is these trade agreements are about other countries sticking it to the U.S. Mm-hmm. We were dumb in how we negotiated them, or other countries take advantage of us. That's not the deal. The deal is actually that these agreements were hatched in the U.S. after being marinated in corporate influence, and we, the U.S., helped impose these corporate rules on everyone. It wasn't we're the victim. We were one of the reasons these bad rules got hatched. And so the results that Trump spotlighted, very bad results, to appeal to voters in Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania, those are real results. But the reason those results are there is not because Mexico stuck it to us in NAFTA. It's because a bunch of big corporations, mainly in the U.S., but also in Canada and Mexico, got a set of rules that they like that have been a losing proposition for people in all three countries. So we just did a study with LACLA, the Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. Mm-hmm. That's on our website, tradewatch.org. That presents the empirical data that shows actually the biggest victims, people most penalized by NAFTA, are working people in Mexico and Latino and African American workers in the U.S. U.S. workers have seen almost 1 million specific good manufacturing middle-class wage jobs certified by the U.S. government as outsourced to NAFTA under these special protections that promote outsourcing. Mexico, Canada have paid hundreds of millions of dollars to corporations who attacked domestic policies using the outrageous NAFTA investor state tribunal system, where corporations can extract taxpayer money, attacking domestic health and environmental laws, claiming They violate their new NAFTA investor rights. All of these outcomes are directly attributable to a set of rules that basically put corporate interests first. And so when Trump is renegotiating NAFTA, his view of what the problem is, Mexico stuck it to us, is not related to what the actual problem is. Now, happily, the guy who is his lead negotiator is a guy who's worked with the unions for a very long time, and he actually managed to get some of the fixes exactly right. So we have this renegotiated NAFTA that was signed on November 30th, and part of it got fixed. So those investor state tribunals got largely whacked, which is amazing. That's civil society should feel great about that.
Can you explain what those are? Just briefly get into the investor state, because those are really big. Can you just give us a little bit of details on those in a minute, and then explain where the renegotiation failed?
You bet. So what I want to just say before I explain investor state is the way I would look at it right now is some important things got fixed, things that progressive have been demanding forever. Some new bad stuff got added, new rights for big pharma to lock in high medicine prices. That has got to go. And then there's some really important unfinished business. There's some improvements on labor standards, but not enough, and they're not yet sufficiently enforceable. The environmental standards still need to be strengthened and made more enforceable. And right now, progressive members of Congress, organizations are all united, basically, thank goodness, because the Democrats now have a majority in the House, saying, hey, you want this agreement to pass? You got to make the rest of the improvements. You got to get rid of the big pharma stuff. You got to add the labor and environmental enforcement and strengthening. And then there might be an agreement that could stop some of NAFTA's damage. The agreement you signed is not going to cut it. So, ISDS. One of the things they did fix is this regime that was first hatched with NAFTA, because NAFTA really was the model for all of these other bad agreements, including TPP. TPP was like NAFTA on steroids. So at the heart of all of those agreements is this regime called investor state dispute settlement, where multinational corporations are empowered to attack countries' domestic laws and attack them not in domestic courts, but in front of tribunals of 3 corporate attorneys. And the corporate attorneys are allowed to order the governments to pay unlimited amounts to be paid by us taxpayers for any domestic policy, law, regulation, court decision, government action that the corporations claim undermine the investor protections and rights they have in the agreement. And these 3 private sector attorneys who rotate between being the not really judges and suing governments for corporations, these guys rotate, so incredible conflict of interest, and their decisions aren't appealable. And the sums they can make us pay are unlimited. So $392 million has been ordered paid in ISDS NAFTA attacks against zoning policies, water policies, timber policies, energy policies, toxic bans. And that system in the revised NAFTA is totally eliminated between the U.S. and Canada, which is a big deal, because the sad story is the majority of the attacks have been U.S. corporations attacking Canada's superior environmental and health laws.
Right.
So that's totally ended in NAFTA 2.0. And then with respect to Mexico, the broad corporate rights that have been the basis for these attacks and environmental laws are eliminated. The claims that can be made are for what's called expropriation. If the government takes your property and doesn't pay you back, and there are limits on how much the damages can be. There's a new rule that says no rotating for the tribunalists and the people who sue governments. But most importantly, under this replacement for ISDS, the corporations have to go to domestic courts. They have to spend 2.5 years in domestic courts and get a ruling from the highest court in the land, or get no ruling before they can even start the process under the very limited claims available. That's huge progress. There's one loophole. The broad rights are preserved. for the 7 U.S. oil and gas companies that have 9 existing contracts with Mexico's Hydrocarbons Authority. And that loophole, Democrats and progressives are fighting to get narrowed. But that was an important improvement that people have been fighting for forever. In contrast, the TPP expanded ISDS. It covered, in TPP, it wasn't just the whole old bad system, it also allowed attacks on financial regulation policies. So that is a big step in the right direction. Also, some horrible NAFTA rules that forced countries to export natural resources that they wanted to conserve was removed. Some actual trade rules that allowed a lot of products basically made in China to sneak through under the NAFTA duty-free benefits were tightened up. That's important. An interesting new rule was added that for products to get the NAFTA benefits, a portion of an automobile's value has to be made by workers making $16 an hour or more. Mm-hmm. That's the first time that wage levels have been linked to market access. That's super important. Mm-hmm. Another really big fix was a big problem on the original NAFTA of basically requiring trucks from Mexico and Canada that didn't meet U.S. environmental or safety standards. They had to be allowed on U.S. roads. That got removed, so now those safety standards and also the worker-driver hour or safety rules, all that stuff can be reapplied. So those are important improvements. The problem is that the environmental and labor improvements needed to get rid of, to at least lessen, the incentives to outsource jobs are not yet sufficient. And they added new monopoly rights for Big Pharma.
Mm-hmm. So I want to we'll get those. I want to actually, before we get to that, what are specifically the new monopoly rights for Big Pharma?
So here is what the agreement did. It has rules that would guarantee for pharmaceutical corporations that basically forever, because trade agreements generally don't have termination periods, the new NAFTA does have a 6-year review provision, which is important. Corporations hate it. There is a way that it can be sunset. It's not easy to use, but the current NAFTA goes on forever. And an improvement in the new agreement is there is this review and possible sunset. But basically, unless a country got out, there would be forever a requirement that all governments provide to pharmaceutical companies the exact policies now in place in the U.S. that cause the high prices. So, for instance, 10 years of what's called marketing exclusivity for what are called biologic medicines. Those are all the cutting-edge new drugs that are used to treat cancer, diabetes, a lot of autoimmune diseases, plus a bunch of vaccines. And these drugs now, in addition to their patents, which is a monopoly for 20 years, have these marketing exclusivities, which basically says even if you don't have a patent, you just can't sell this drug for 10 years as a generic. Mm-hmm. So that has led to prices for these kind of biologic medicines being hundreds of thousands of dollars a year per patient. Just totally, to put this in perspective, biologics are a relatively small portion of total medicines, but they represent 70% of the growth in medicine price expenditures in the last 5 years. So they're super expensive. That's got to change. Lots of legislation in Congress would whack back those exclusivity periods. Another thing the new NAFTA would lock in is what's called evergreening. These are a whole basket of different policies the pharmaceutical companies use to extend their actual patents behind 20 years. So that is, for instance, the new NAFTA requires governments to allow new 20-year patents on known chemicals, one that's already had a patent, if the company finds a new use. So like Viagra was originally a hair growth medicine. And this other effect was reported. So a second patent for the other use of Viagra besides growing hair could be registered for another 20 years. Or, for instance, by combining a patented drug with something else, you could get a new 20-year monopoly. That kind of stuff has to go. That means, drug companies get more than 20 years of monopoly. So those things get locked in. So those are some of the things that have to come out. It's stuff Mexico and Canada didn't want. The U.S. negotiators pushed that stuff, and now the Democrats in Congress are very unified, saying, hey, whatever you think about trade, we're not going to sign an international agreement that takes away Congress's ability to make the changes necessary to bring down medicine prices.
And forgive me if I'm wrong, but for when we think of what industry spends the most on lobbying in Washington, and we think of defense and oil companies and obviously financial services in Silicon Valley, but if I understand correctly, it is pharma. Pharma has the most lobbyists or most money flowing to Congress, if I understand that correctly. So that
is correct. There's studies after studies that show that, but here's the one thing that's happened that gives us the chance to get this fixed. Everyone in this country, Democrats, Republicans, has come into a state of rage about current medicine prices. Mm-hmm. And we saw a lot of Democrats, who are now the new majority in the House, elected on this issue. So as much as pharma has lots of money sloshing around Washington, there are also a lot of members of Congress who realize the public is like ready to come after them with pitchforks if they don't deal with this. And even the president has been screaming, the press has been in the last 2 weeks, screaming at his own advisors about, what are we doing to bring down medicine prices? Right, well, the first thing they shouldn't do is lock in high prices. So this seems to be one, if we do the work, we can get this fixed.
Absolutely. So, I also, if you'll indulge me for a second, my comedic mind, when you talked about the other effect of Viagra, I thought of like a scene in Sopranos, but it would be like pharmaceutical Sopranos. Like, hey, Tone, there's another effect. We can get we can get an extension on it. All right. Now that I've indulged myself there for a second. So okay. And actually, I want to just put 3 things on the table, and one of them will be a bit longer. So I hope we can go in at least another couple of minutes. But just first, briefly, I've just noticed. I mean, you've been calling this NAFTA 2.0, not. I don't even know what Trump has been calling it, but just to be really clear that the spin from the administration that this is a totally new thing is nonsense and wrong, and this is, with both its improvements and its actual worsenings, this is another version of NAFTA. This is not any type of reinvention, which Trump would have you believe.
Yeah, it's a rebrand. He is trying to make the claim that he has totally replaced NAFTA. This is not the transformational replacement of the NAFTA model. Right. It should be called NAFTA 2.0. The question and the test in the end is, can we get the additional improvements made so that this agreement, its revised version, if in the end, can be a deal that can stop some of NAFTA's serious ongoing damage. So if this were a blank slate, like with TPP, where you either had a new agreement or you didn't have a new agreement, this agreement would not be something people would be fighting to make better necessarily. Mm-hmm. The difference is we got a NAFTA in place. Right. It's causing ongoing damage every damn week. Every week, more middle-class jobs are being outsourced. And here's the thing. We don't begrudge people in Mexico a good job. The problem is NAFTA is like a machine that turns middle-class jobs into sweatshop jobs. Right. Because jobs in Mexico pay $1.50 to $2 an hour for jobs that folks in the U.S. were getting paid $15, $20, $25 an hour for. And by the way, it's not just manufacturing. I mean, the newest thing is like AT&T is putting a big call center. Right. No, Verizon. It's Verizon is putting a big call center into Mexico City, 5,000 seats, and they are recruiting people at the airport who've been unjustly deported, knowing that they found people who speak English and they can pay them $1.50 an hour to do the same job that if they were in the U.S., they'd be represented by a union, CWA, communication workers, and have a good middle-class wage, benefits, etc. So it's a race to the bottom in wages so that the reason, for instance, the last leftover thing, besides getting the pharma stuff out, the environmental and labor standards need to be improved and made subject to swift and certain enforcement. And here's why. Real wages in Mexico are down. The median real wage is down 3% since NAFTA went into effect. And it was not a survivable wage that could feed a family. You could work, two people could work full-time and not be able to support a family of four under the wages that were available before NAFTA, and now it's down. So just to put this in perspective, Mexican manufacturing wages are now 40% cheaper than in China. So for people in Mexico, getting the rules strengthened so they can have a real union, have higher wages, is a moral imperative. So when a lot of people say, how can you stomach trying to work to improve and maybe pass a trade agreement with this administration? The answer is, if you're a progressive person and you look at this new NAFTA draft, there's an annex in there that says Mexico agrees to provide secret ballot votes on union contracts, and in 4 years to replace all of the fake, what are called protection union contracts. Those are contracts now allowed under Mexican labor law, where before a worker even gets hired, a branch of the old political party, the PRI, that calls itself a union, goes into the boss. For a certain amount of money, they make a contract. It protects the corporation. They register it under law because the Mexican Constitution requires union representation. Now there's a contract. The workers didn't approve it. They don't know about it. It's low wages. Workers come in, realize they have crap pay, do a strike, and they'll get fired for violating the contract that they never approved. And if they try and organize an independent union, they get fired and go to jail for violating labor law. So if we could really make those rules in the revised agreement that for the first time would let Mexican workers have independent unions and really fight to raise their wages, that is something we have to try to get to become reality, as well as other improvements that are in that agreement. That is something that is not just critical to stop the pull that Mexico's low wages have to outsource U.S. jobs, but that's also really important to making the standard of living in Mexico, the wages paid there, decent. Otherwise, again, middle-class jobs, whether they are being filled by Mexican or U.S. workers, turn into sweatshop jobs. And it's just not acceptable, that race to the bottom.
100%. And this is really, really crucial because, you know, in the press coverage, particularly in 2016, the lazy and I will say corporate media narrative was, well, I mean, they drew a lot of false equivalencies between Sanders and Trump, but very specifically on trade. The way they would say Trump's sort of like general, just kind of xenophobic bellicosity and all these conspiracies and nonsense about somehow Trump, you know, Mexico getting one over on the United States versus Bernie Sanders' principled call to have trade agreements that reflected a broad set of needs, labor, the environment, living standards, and allowing for, the obvious trade that comes to people's minds. I mean, that's a big problem. If you say trade, these people want you to think like, oh, right, this means like, you get your coffee from Colombia and you get to watch a movie, your favorite kung fu movie from Hong Kong and whatever. That's trade. And like what they mean is, as you've been outlining, is actually very technical, very bureaucratic agreements written to benefit corporations, any corporation. So it's real. I love that you connect those dots, not only because it's right on the policy, but because we need to really debunk the lazy, discredited media narrative that there's any equivalency between a left critique of things like NAFTA and the right-wing xenophobia. But of course, at the same time, no doubt, if we can get a better NAFTA with whoever's in there, we absolutely should, 100%. And that leads me to my last kind of general question I want to ask you. It seems to me that every single time there's a new trade agreement that a Democrat pushes, I looked into Clinton, and I obviously, was here for Obama. They always say that whatever fill-in-the-blank new trade agreement has unparalleled side protections for the environment, labor, and public health. And it's going to do great things for, union workers in Indonesia and to protect the world's oceans if it's TPP, or if it's NAFTA. Bill Clinton talked about putting rigorous side agreements on. And we know from the merits and the substance of these agreements, both in the written form with TPP, which thankfully hasn't been implemented, as well as what we've been living through at NAFTA, thanks to analysis and reporting from people like you, that this is just simply not true. But it's highly technical. It's hard to figure out. And so my question for you, and this will be, definitely geared towards Democrats or people likely to be voting in a Democratic primary, which I'm sure is over like 95% of this audience. How do we get really specific in the sense that we could say, look, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, yes, they're probably, Bernie definitely is. Warren seems to definitely be. She has a shorter career, obviously, but I think you could confidently assume they're on the right side of these issues. If Sherrod Brown gets in, he's definitely on the right side of these issues. And then, pretty clearly, Joe Biden's consistently been on the wrong side of these issues. But for candidates, and frankly, I guess this is for any of them, they're all going to say that I'll only support agreements that have great green and labor standards. But because it's so technical and because Democrats always say that, what are the kind of specific questions that, as an example, if you're at a candidate town hall or something like that, to really narrow down what a candidate actually means when they talk about their stance towards trade, so we can get highly specific and know where people are actually coming from on these agreements?
Yep. Very good question. So first of all, one of, I think, the best sort of overviews of what is a progressive set of rules of the road for a trade agreement, and this is not to toot my own horn, but it's something that I wrote with Jared Bernstein, who after he had been, a couple of years after he was Vice President Biden's chief economist, he and I were having a conversation about, what would be the thing we should be calling for? Let's help summarize that. So it's called the new Progressive Rules of the Road on Trade, and it's on Jared's blog. So if you look up Jared Bernstein, you can see this new Rules of the Road, Progressive Rules of the Road for Trade. And that lays out in, 15 pages what it looks like. The trigger questions, folks can actually get talking points sent to them with those questions specific to NAFTA, the renegotiation, but broader. If you go to our action page, which is www.replacenafta.org, there's a sign-up form where it says, do you want to be part of the team that makes sure we replace the corporate rigged trade agreements? And we actually are helping people, lots of people did it in this last election cycle, go to town hall meetings and ask the right questions. That's www.replacenafta.org. Sign up on the action list, because literally you can sign up and then you can say what you want. You can say, I want to know what questions to ask. The short answer is the things that can differentiate clearly between who's for real and who is not is a question about investor-state dispute settlement. Will you oppose any trade agreement? Or if you're president, will you ensure every future U.S. trade agreement does not have investor-state dispute settlement? That's a bright-line question about corporate power. Same thing. If you are elected president, will you ensure that our trade agreements do not contain any new monopolies and powers for big pharma? Bright line question. You either have the patent rules or you don't have the patent rules. On environment and labor specifically, the question to ask is, will you ensure that environmental and labor standards, in the way it's written is tough environmental and labor standards, can be triggered automatically so that enforcement is swift and certain? And that sounds like a complicated question. All it means is the difference between having standards that can be actually enforced by unions or the public bringing up a problem versus having to rely on trade officials to start the process. And there are a bunch of commercial rights in trade agreements that can be triggered. For instance, here's what this means practically. We have these intellectual property rules in trade agreements, and domestic law gets changed so that if a copyrighted product, if a pirated, CD comes in, if a pirated, a fake knockoff of a movie comes in, that can be stopped at the border. And if a product comes in that is supposed to be made in Germany, but really it's from China, and it's a lie. The way the customs forms are filled out, it's a lie. That can be stopped at the border. What we need is a system where products that don't meet a trade agreement's environmental and labor standards can automatically be stopped at the border. That you don't need to go through a whole special rigmarole to try and enforce those standards. That's the same level of enforcement like intellectual property rules or other trade rules. That's what it boils down to. But how you ask the question, again, sign up at www.replacenafta.org, and we will get you the specific talking points.
Awesome. And, of course, we will link to all of that on our homepage at majority.fm. Lori Wallach, you are so important, and this work is so important. I really appreciate it. I hope everybody will follow up on all of those fronts. And if you are participating in this primary in any capacity, get really, really specific, because these trade agreements are, I mean, it's one of those things. It's definitely a 1% versus 99% issue. Unless you're on a boardroom for, Pfizer or something, these agreements are not good for you. They're bad. So Lori Wallach, she's the director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Lori, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate your time.
1,000 thanks to you. And folks, if you feel you want to get more comfortable with the details, the other place to go is tradewatch.org, and we literally have as a report card what the demand was from progressives and then how the agreement measures up. And it's in language for civilians. You do not need to speak NAFTA-ese. So please get involved, and thank you so much for doing the show.
Oh, appreciate it. They are really counting on you being afraid of speaking NAFTA-ese. It's a whole other... I've talked a little bit about Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He was this radical Brazilian educator. And if I recall correctly, he would teach people literacy through learning how to read the newspaper, because he would join together basically like the practical skill of reading with like what the stakes were in their lives in terms of the politics of their moment. And there's just so much garbage policy and garbage ideas that get shuffled through techno speak to try to intimidate you out of following your common sense, which most people really have. I mean, I've used this example a million times, but it's a good example of that Wall Street guy that I'm like, literally running at the treadmill, and he's a loudmouth, whatever, nice guy. We're talking, we get in some argument about derivatives or something, and I used the Matt Taibbi. He was doing all this like, well, look, you're a smart guy, but, I've worked at blah, 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 blah for 10 years or whatever. And I finally gave him, I think, probably a Taibbi example of like, yeah, dude, I look, yeah, sure. I don't have an MBA. I don't work on Wall Street, but it sounds to me that the thing you're talking about is like the scene in Goodfellas where they torch the restaurant and collect the insurance money. And I'm saying that should be regulated or eliminated. And he's just kind of like, yeah, that is what it is. It's like, right. So don't try to like come at me with your gobbledygook. And it's the same with NAFTA. And somebody like Lori Wallach is so smart and such a clear communicator. She breaks it down. So I would just say, yeah, follow all of her work on global trade. And as the hysterical professor from Canada would say, be very precise with the candidates about it. All right, folks, we are going to go to the fun half momentarily. And it's going to be a very exciting fun half, frankly. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this show happens. That's how you have in-depth conversations and discover the vital work of people like Lori Wallach. You can do that by going to the Majority Report homepage, clicking on membership or support, and getting yourself a membership. Do it today. JustCoffee.coop. Of course, today's sponsor, if it's relevant to you, check it out. Get the deal. Subscribe on YouTube. All the rest of the ways that you can help keep this show growing and humming. Of course, keep the Michael Brooks Show growing and humming. We are 50 patrons away from our 2,000 patron goal. Let's get there. Help sustain, obviously, and expand our work. And also will lead us to do this food bucket challenge, which I thought was a much better idea when we were about 700 people away from the next goal. But it will be fun. Of course, tonight we're live. Usually we're on Tuesdays, but because of frankly, because of the government shutdown, has affected our workflow. And it's going to affect because we're going to do Thursday again next week because we're doing Majority Report coverage of Trump's State of the Union address.
Don't sound too excited.
Let me just say preemptively, I'm sick. No, I'm just playing. I'll be there. I will be there on Tuesday night. But tonight we are live. So we're also starting an hour earlier because we need to do the final bit of preparation for our first TMBS live show tomorrow night at the Bell House. So we're starting earlier at 6 p.m. We are obviously got a lot to cover on Venezuela. And then the great Bill Fletcher Jr. joins us. We're talking about uprisings that are happening right now in Zimbabwe and the Sudan that circle around labor, austerity, global trade regimes. And then we're going to talk about the legacy of the revolutionary Amilcar Cabral and Africa in the leftist imagination. Bill Fletcher Jr. is a former president of Trans-Africa Forum and one of the most important people in the game today, kind of a mentor to me. Live tonight, 6 p.m., the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. And, of course, become a patron and get the whole thing, 2-to-1 content at Patreon. That is 2 more post-game and illicit histories, plus the full main long show, which is quite an endeavor in and of itself, at patreon.com/TMBS, patreon.com/TMBS. I'm not sure about the ticket situation, but there's a link, so go check it out on the homepage and see. We look forward to seeing everybody there. Jamie, what's going on?
Yeah, so this week on the Antifada, we speak with the always on point Leslie Lee III from
I like
Struggle
Leslie
Session.
Lee III a lot. He's a good guy. He's funny and smart.
He's so funny and he's so smart, and I would call him a hater, except he really likes the things that he likes as well. He's got great taste, and he's like really funny and mean about stuff that's bad, and like just really likes genuinely the things that are good. So
like comic books and Nation of Islam Obama.
Sure.
No, he is a big fan of Nation of Islam Obama.
As well as the Purge movies, which I had slept on for way too long. So we talk with him about the Purge series as well as The Handmaid's Tale. We finally talk about The Handmaid's Tale. I know people have been asking me when we're going to do that.
Is that show still on?
I mean, I'm not going to watch it anymore. I think I've seen enough, but it's coming back apparently. And we talk about it sort of in the context of what it means to like resistance libs and all the horrible memes people have made based on it. Like this one that I think you're going to find funny. It's a picture of the handmaids dressed up in their, like rape slave garb. And one of them's like, oh, I know, but I just didn't like Hillary.
Wow, so it's a
like,
Jill Stein shot, huh?
Yeah, so
that's pretty funny.
It's like, see,
Getting
this is what
super
happens
specifics
when you
with
don't vote for Hillary. Now you're living under theocratic fascism.
It's so hard to pull off the dialectic of disputing dumb moralism voting, which is voting for Jill Stein in a swing state, with, on the other hand, this like resistance, like, well, you voted the wrong way, and Hillary Clinton was a perfectly good candidate, and there was no problem in society, and Obama and her and everybody would just have Amazon Prime, but you wrecked it. And there was never any problem before until November 2016.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. So presumably you guys knocked that dialectic out of the park.
I like to think so. Leslie Lee he's so good.
Yes.
He's good, folks.
He is very good.
And I think this weekend, Sean and I are going to be on some sort of Twitch thing that the Chapo folks are doing for the Super Bowl. What?
Oh,
I heard
I thought I heard something.
I heard an exclamation behind me. But yeah, it's going to be weird, probably.
It sounds weird. Matt.
House of the Seven Gables, we unpack what might be of interest to this audience of nerds. We unpack a reference.
Look at Matt just going in on the audience.
A reference Hawthorne makes to Charles Fourier, who was a French utopian socialist, a pre-Marx socialist. So. And Hawthorne actually name drops him in the House of Seven Gables, and we go into that.
Nice. He's going to come on later in the fun half to visit us on camera for a couple of minutes. But I should say the infamous Jeff from Georgia is visiting us. He's in town, And so I'll take this opportunity to say to go to patreon.com/dissident peasant and check out his work over there in the plug section of the show. He's chomping at the bit. All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude! You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Grandpa.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good.
Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey Sam, hey Andy, you guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Bullprog? Bullprog did that? Is Matt's mic up? Okay. Very funny. Very funny, very smart. Dankalicious. In 2011, when Tulsi Gabbard was a Honolulu City Council member, she wrote one of the first laws, Bill 54, that specifically went after the Occupy movement, letting people seize their personal property. Oh, really? She's a fucking progressive. She's a fucking progressive.
Wait, what was that law?
It apparently would allow people it would allow the police to seize the personal property of people in Occupy.
For protesting.
Yeah, I guess. I want to go off on a joke on this, but I don't really, we need to research that more. I also want to be really clear that, like, the problem, first of all, there's a difference between politicians and I would say even people personal, like, everybody evolves and everybody changes, and I think we need to be welcoming and have a big tent and not be purists and all the rest of that in general, and even with politicians. So the beef with Tulsi Gabbard is not every single thing that she's gotten wrong, right? Like, everybody's gotten things wrong or previous positions. The beef is actually there are certain things like the connections to Modi that are contemporaneous and still a problem. So I want to just draw that distinction. I also think, like, frankly, I think between us and TMBS, you know, we've like, if she has another uptick and she still doesn't address some of the concerns, we'll go back to it. But I think, like, we've put in our, I guess I'm not interested in a pile on Tulsi Gabbard in the same way I am about, like, Howard Schultz.
Particularly the week she was good on Venezuela.
Right. Exactly. Like, Tulsi Gabbard this week was in my feed for making the right call on Venezuela. Precisely. Scientology Howard, politics is broken. Risk the imagination of a new type of possibility. I forget who said it on Twitter, but somebody called it an ancient billionaire proverb, which I thought was really funny. Greg from Oklahoma. Hey, Greg, I hope you're doing well. I turn 21 next Tuesday. Should I play a drinking game while watching the State of the Union next week on my birthday? Joking. Good. I'm glad you're joking. You should be out with friends having fun and definitely not watching that fucker's State of the Union on your birthday. Also, my congressperson, Kendra Horn from Oklahoma, from Oklahoma's 5th, became a member of the Blue Dog Coalition this week in the House. Very disappointing. Yeah, probably not.
People are still becoming official members of that?
Yeah, I didn't even know that the Blue Dogs still existed.
Yeah.
I actually like, in my mind, I don't think they're really like this, but I like the idea of Blue Dogs more than, like, New Democrats. Because, like, New Democrats, in my head, I have, like, a picture of, like, basically just, like, some asshole from Westchester being like, I think Howard Schultz has a lot of ideas. But, like, a Blue Dog, I kind of think, like, my daddy and I went hunting for generations. And we also got to put all of the people who founded Halliburton in jail. Now, like, that person doesn't exist anymore, and the Blue Dogs are just, like, corporatists. But I have a soft spot for, you know.
Also, like North Dakota politics, we had Dorgan and Conrad for a long time. And the whole point of Conrad is, like, someone like Dorgan shouldn't be possible in North Dakota.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dorgan was real different than Conrad.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Dorgan was kind of a prairie populist.
Yeah, he called the financial crisis famously. And, but yeah, like.
And he was actually, he would be the type of person that, at least on things like Lori Wallach talked about, he was all over critiquing those trade agreements.
Yep.
And that was another thing that I remembered. You could look in some, like, alternative weekly rag, and it would be like, why, like, you know, NAFTA is corporate plunder by, like, rainforest wild deer, you know, eco activist, and then it would be like, this trade agreement's ridiculous, eh? By Senator Byron Dorgan. He was all over it. That's all I really know about him. I'm not sure he was great on everything, but he was definitely had.
He's better than Conrad, which is how.
Well, Conrad was a corporatist.
Yeah.
Conrad was like the kind of guy Obama would fetishize.
He's like the kind of guy who'd be the third plate at, like, a Ezra Klein, Paul Ryan lunch.
Right, exactly. And Ezra Klein was just like, oh my god, just
my favorite guys.
The vapors of this meeting. Oh my god, they're talking about readjusting COLA again. All right, let us take a few calls. You're calling from a 301 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, Michael. It's Vito from Maryland.
Vito from Maryland. How you doing? You sound a little bummed. I hope you're not, buddy. You all right?
You know, I've been laughing along with you guys about this Schultz thing. Then,
okay,
started watching this guy on TV.
Right.
And I just started getting more pissed off. I
mean,
here's a guy that has a lack of self-awareness that is stunning. I mean, he comes on and starts talking about, I'm a self-made man, and I grew up in the projects in New York in the 50s, and I couldn't believe that nobody thought to ask him or say, you know, it's kind of ironic that housing subsidy you received in the 50s was paid for with a 91% top marginal tax rate.
You know what? So not only do I agree with that 100%. I just want to add one other thing too, and it's not as important as what you just outlined there, and he should be getting asked that every single place he goes. But it's like, I also, and I'm being really nitpicky here, but like, the guy is lower middle class and grew up in public housing, and that helped, and he's a complete class traitor hypocrite, no doubt. But I also have to say, like, he didn't, in the popular imagination, projects mean something that he did not experience, right? Like, he grew up in pleasant.
Like DuPont or Rockefeller, but
no, he wasn't. But he didn't grow up like.
What this really is.
He grew up when the social safety net gave white ethnics an opportunity and funded them well to be in decent public housing, which should be expanded, which was racialized and needs to be expanded to everybody. It's a good thing. I'm glad he had it, and everybody should have it. But when you say projects in the popular imagination, primarily because of racism and racial anxiety, but just as an objective fact, you're bringing something up that sounds like he had a much more thorough growing rough time of it than he did. And I think it's relevant because it's like, even there, it's like, it's honestly enough to say, I grew up working class and became a billionaire. Like, okay, that's a certain trajectory. I don't know if you drew the right lessons from it. But when you say, like, I grew up in the projects, like, okay, Howard, sure. Yeah. You were a survivor.
Yeah, he's the living embodiment.
Chris Hayes, that I guess he wrote an article. I forget the name of the guy, but it was something to the effect of the revenge of the plutocrats. And basically, what he was saying is, he goes, "What's going on here really is this guy saying, this guy was a lifelong Democrat, right? Now he sees the party changing, and he's like, well, if you guys start getting these big ideas, then I'll just have to, throw a wrench in it for you, because I'm willing to put up with 4 more years of fascism in order to hold on to my money."
Of course.
It's
well, we've been saying that for ages. And also, also for what it's worth, the guy is, just because he has less money and because of how he looks and sounds and speaks and carries himself. But the Diamond Resort International guy was way ahead of the curve here. He said over a year ago, he's like, keep it simple. Remember that guy? Klubeck?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the same. They're the same person. Obviously.
Then they wonder why people want to end up, this is why, you listen to people like this, and then it's like, so people like this, one day, it's good. People are just going to get. These people are going to end up like in gulags or re-education camps if they keep exploiting everybody. And I don't know. It's really depressing. But anyway.
Oh man,
you guys are doing a
the
great job.
soundboard is broken. I was going to give you fanfare for that.
From your mouth to God's ears. Honey.
From your mouth to Allah's ears.
You know what?
Excuse Jamie.
Thank
you, Vito. Thanks, brother.
This guy is the living embodiment of that old economy Steven meme. You guys know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Maybe we should remake it with him as the guy.
I think people should get to work. I like that.
Graduates college, gets hired.
No,
in my day, my first job was $15,000 a year. That would be $47,000 a year in today's money. You get the idea.
I also Waz pointed out to me on Woke Bros that he sold, I think, the Supersonics because he had a tantrum about not getting a subsidy he expected as well. The guy, he's just an asshole.
Yeah, that's what any sports owner does.
That's what but it's but every sports owner as an illustration of why everything that he represents is wrong. You're calling from a 510 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is that me?
Yes, this is you. Could you say your name and where you're calling from, please?
Yeah, this is Isha from Indiana.
Hi, Isha.
I had called in once before talking about Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
I guess just kind of going away from that, but more in general. Michael, I listened to the conversation you had with Soumya Shankar on Sunday.
Oh, for TMBS. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you had unlocked it online, and I don't have a Twitter or anything, but I just read that article from The Intercept, and I really, really strongly wanted to push back against a lot of the stuff that she said.
Okay.
Because I'm part of the American sister organization. Well, it's not really an American organization. It's international. And it's Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh. It's not RSS, and it has nothing to do with nationalism. And also, I think you had another journalist on, Corey pain or pine, and he
Yes.
said that RSS translates to like National Patriotic Organization, which isn't true. Rashtriya means nation, and then Swayamsevak means literally giving yourself in service, and Sangh means unity. So it's
So you
more
don't
about
think that
like
that's a
selfless
fair?
service to the
You don't think
country.
that's a fair translation of that into English? Really?
No, because Swayamsevak like has nothing to do with like it's not just about like nationalism and patriotism. Like the word seva in Sanskrit means service.
I understand. I know what seva mean. I know, but I'm saying. I mean, all right. I don't want to. Obviously, you know the language better than me, but it doesn't.
I mean,
you don't have.
I'm not just
you
the
don't have a
language,
slam
but, like,
dunk
I
there in terms
visited
of
orphanages
translation.
that they operate in India.
Okay.
No, like it's not just the language. Like I've visited orphanages they operate.
So that's great.
You know,
that's awesome.
given a lot of relief to.
Here's my question for you. So okay, and I'm not being like, I want to be really clear here. I don't mean this. Well, I'm not sure this will be taken right, but just like, okay, things like orphanages and things like that, the Muslim Brotherhood does that, Hamas does that, Hezbollah does that. There's a lot of organizations that we might have other very serious
Yeah,
political.
and honestly, I don't even want to comment further on RSS because I don't really want to speak on stuff that I don't know all that much about. But in terms of like her saying that she's finding names from quote unquote Hindu nationalist organizations, like in that case, you know, I'm listed in event announcements, which is what she cited.
Okay.
And I went to, you know, a fundraiser for Tulsi Gabbard back in 2012. And yeah, there were a lot of Indian Americans there. There were a lot of Hindus there. They didn't have like a connection to Modi. And I think it's really disingenuous for her to say like, oh, I looked through names and they're tied to Hindu nationalism. I
Well,
mean, it's kind of an oxymoron because if you're living in the U.S. and you're just
give me a
advocating
second,
for Hindus in the
Isha.
U.S.
Isha, I'll let you keep
Sorry.
going, but no problem. So just to be clear, okay, she wrote a piece documenting Tulsi Gabbard's connections to the far right and Modi government in India. And part of that piece was she talked about fundraisers and donors. And she actually had some very specific individuals, including ones that she interviewed for the piece, who do also support far right forces in India. So it wasn't just names generically. Although, to be honest with you, I like the piece and I respect the reporting, but I think that that should have been made even more specific in the article. So I think that's a fair criticism. But she did make those connections.
But I don't
The
think
second
the people
part,
that
Isha,
she
just
named
really
that-
quickly, Isha, just quickly.
Yeah.
Go with me. I'll get right back to you. The second thing, though, I just want to say, to be really, really clear, is she herself is a Hindu. She's an Indian immigrant in the United States, and we said repeatedly in the conversation that there is not only is there no problem with a greater involvement in Hindus in American politics, but actually that's welcome. If they're progressive, because we have progressive politics, obviously. So in the same way that I object to Jewish politicians who have connections with Likud forces in Israel, that's a very big problem to me. But I would love to see somebody, who was connected with Moretz or Peace Now or the Joint List. So I think what's the trouble here is maybe we could get to like the specific of what you actually think she's getting wrong about the far right in India.
Yeah, like the specifics, I would want to say, this is at a time when Pakistan is actively funding terrorism. So all of the ridiculous tropes that right-wingers come up with in the U.S. that neighboring countries are exporting terrorism into the U.S. and, it's batshit crazy what they say. But, there are elements of truth to that when it comes to the conversation around India. You look at the 1971 Bangladeshi genocide. You look at the ethnic cleansing of Kashmir.
I'm sorry,
that's not ancient history.
Isha. So, okay. And these are like show worthy in and of themselves. But first of all, okay, I don't think, and nobody, of course, the Pakistanis fund terrorist groups. ISI has operational connections to groups like that sometimes attack India and operate in Afghanistan and operate in Pakistan.
When you put RSS
so
on the same foot
but
as
that's
the KKK,
not.
I just feel like that's wrong of you,
Well, no, it's not, because that's not the issue.
Well,
The issue
because
is
they
the
never
issue
advocate
is
for like casteism. They
Isha,
don't say that upper
Isha.
caste is best.
well, okay, but casteism is casteism. I'm going to object to that because of my politics. You can
I
understand
object to it too. I'm just saying that organization doesn't engage in that at all.
Well, that is contrary to every single piece of reporting on this. And also, here's the other problem.
the
But
leadership
let's
of the
no, we got to take
organization,
one
Michael.
thing, Isha. We got to take one thing at a time. When you talk about, there is a, let's actually make a U.S. parallel. Okay, so yes, it's different when you say India, and also I know that this will probably take us down another rabbit hole as well, which we don't really have time for, but. Do the Pakistanis support groups in Kashmir that commit attacks? Absolutely. And do the Indians commit obscene human rights violations in Kashmir? Absolutely. So that's a complicated issue that implicates both sides. That being said, the difference is even in the United States, if somebody said really specifically, Al-Qaeda is a terrorist group, or ISIS is a terrorist group that attacks civilians in the Middle East and Europe and maybe wants to try in the United States, even though they usually fail. That's an objective claim. That's true. Just like the Pakistanis have some connection with groups that engage in terrorism. That's true. We know that, as an example, the Pakistanis were operational in the attacks on the Oberoi Hotel and the mass murder in Mumbai in 2008. Like, this is objective reality. No one is disputing that. What people are disputing is a politics that says that India is for Hindus, or Brazil is for Christians, or America is for Christians, or, by the way, Pakistani, or wait, hold on, or Pakistan is for Sunnis. So what no one has been, you're saying things, some of which I think are more complicated, like Kashmir, or other things I completely agree with you on. But what you're not addressing is that incidents of the abuse of Muslims and Christians have increased under Modi. The Gujarat killings, of which he was in the most gentle way complicit, and the far right nationalist politics that underlines the BJP and the RSS. These people really were literally the people that assassinated Gandhi. In fact, I saw an RSS video the other day that
before he assassinated.
Okay, but the political and the predecessors, and people should read The Clash Within by Martha Nussbaum.
Look, and you can look into Gandhi's association. I know you joke about how, some people are critical of his relationship with Muslim folks. It's not that. It's that he early on was affiliated with people who later on joined a Pakistan separatist movement. Initially, they were all part of India.
Isha, they were all part of the Congress Party. That's very disingenuous.
Okay, so one last thing. Soumya Shankar mentioned the mosque, the Babri Masjid, and she said, it's a really important 15th century mosque. What she fails to mention is it's widely credited to have been built by a guy from Uzbekistan.
Okay, that's fine. But that's ancient.
Islam,
but Isha, that's ancient history. Was it not in the 1990s used by the Hindu far right to destroy and also help demonize the Muslim community in India, regardless of the ancient history?
And I think a lot of politics in India is more dumb politics, and they do a lot for political expediency.
Right.
But she's not going to talk about the Indian Congress Party and their problematic leaders.
But there's not somebody running for president who's connected to the Indian Congress Party. Wait for the next president. But there's not someone running for president connected with the Indian Congress Party. So that's not the point.
No, I know. But if you look historically at Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi,
but
even
this
their
isn't
leadership
the point.
now.
Isha, we got to go. But I will do an illicit history of the of broader Indian politics, and I will deal with Indira Gandhi,
as opposed to that, I want to narrow in on what I know
Tulsi
about,
Gabbard.
and I just want to
Tulsi Gabbard's connected
on the
with
idea that Hindu nationalists operate in the U.S. I'm a part of the organization. A lot of us have very progressive ideas. A lot of us believe in having more conversations about intersectionality and having progressive conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So I just.
But I think a lot of people have progressive ideas. Like, I know people who say, they're from Brazil and I love AOC and Bernie, but they want to imprison
HSS,
Lula.
Michael, ignore RSS. Just look up HSS. Just look up HSS US Look up what they say. They have nothing to do with the political ideology.
I will
of
look
RSS
into
in
it.
India.
You're not going to convince me on BJP and RSS, but I will look into HSS.
No,
and
I don't plan on
and
convincing
you
you.
become
I think they're
a
problematic in
patron
and
of
themselves.
TMBS, and I will do more India coverage. Patreon.com/TMBS. Isha, if you can afford to contribute to Tulsi's campaign, you can afford to become a patron of the Michael Brooks Show. Thank you so much for the call.
Why should I care what happens in India? That was going to be my question for her.
Oh, thank God you didn't. No, look,
JK.
I mean, I think we have a pretty fundamental disagreement, but I appreciate. I mean, if there was, look, the last thing I'll say about this is if this was the 1980s, if we lived in the 1980s and Indira Gandhi was assassinated by Sikhs, and the Congress Party was in power, and there began a pogrom against Sikhs in India, which happened after she was assassinated. And her son said something like, when you poke a great, I'm paraphrasing, but basically essentially like every action has a reaction as his signal of like, we're not doing anything about this. You can go kill whoever you want. And there was a prominent Indian politician in the United States running for president who shared a donor base with the Indian Congress Party and affiliated with politicians condoning the mass murder of Sikhs. I promise you that I would have covered that aggressively. That's not what Tulsi Gabbard's deal is. Tulsi Gabbard's connected to the Hindu far right in India. And, you know, I understand. I've even stipulated in the conversation that nationalism arising in a historically colonized country is a different thing, 100%. But I still oppose it, right? Like, Israel is more understandable historically because of this situation of the Jewish people. The Iranian Revolution in a lot is super understandable and sympathetic. But I still oppose nationalism and religious-based government. And you're just not going to convince me that that's not what's happening in India. I'm sorry. All right, let's do some sound. I would probably vote for Narendra Modi over this guy, Mike Bloomberg. Although Modi's not great on economics either. So I had to give Mikey some credit the other day because he made the obvious point that Howard Schultz's narcissistic delusions about running for president could help hand the White House to Donald Trump. And then it was as if on cue, he was like, I'm getting praised in progressive circles. I need to remind everybody of what an asshole I am. And so here he is talking about why, and this is at a campaign event in New Hampshire. And this is I know it's a very, it's a racist cultural trope, but Tonto and the Lone Ranger would say, who we, white man? And this is definitely a who you question that Mike Bloomberg is asking here about who can afford Medicare for all.
I think you could never afford that. You're talking about trillions of dollars. I think you can have Medicare for all for people that are uncovered, but because that's a smaller group and a lot of them are taking care of Medicaid already, Medicare. But to replace the entire private system where companies provide health care for their employees would bankrupt us for a very long time.
A very long time. It just simply wouldn't work.
Who does he mean by us?
I mean,
who does he mean when he say you could never afford that? Is he talking to me?
I think he's talking to about literally a couple of thousand people across the planet. What's so funny about it is that, and I think, again, we don't even need to pull up the tweet, but I'm pretty sure it was Anand Giridharadas, who's he's just like in machine gun mode right now. He pointed out that, like, Bloomberg, his commitment to give to philanthropy as well as political campaigns well exceeds what he would be taxed at under the AOC proposal. And the point is, though, and this correlates perfectly yesterday with the conversation about art, which is like what these oligarchs are actually saying. It's like, first of all, just dismiss. They can afford it. That's bullshit. That's a lie. That's nonsense. Anybody who says that is not being serious. Or their definition of afford is like, I might only have 5 homes instead of 10. Nonsense. But what they're actually saying is like, I'm willing to do some good things, and I'm going to hold you hostage for it. So there's like a fundamental delusion and threat under it. Yeah.
At least when it's the government administrating their money, it's theoretically a more democratic system than just billionaires deciding who gets their money. The problem with government is that it's not democratic enough.
Yes, but that's, that's going into the complete opposite direction of what you people are, what those people are talking about.
And didn't Bernie, I think we'll probably get into it more tomorrow, but didn't he announce some pretty big wealth tax thing yesterday?
His wealth tax kind of blows Warren's out of the water.
Do.
That's what I'm
What
saying.
the fuck?
Listen here, Pocahontas.
That's why I said Warren should have jacked hers up a little bit more. Even though
She definitely should have jacked
I mean, it
hers
is
up.
radical, right? Like, and it's probably with a Gorsuch court, they're going to challenge it constitutionally,
Sure.
because of how much the income tax was challenged. But I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like the whole Tony Blair, but you do like leftist policies. Like
Exactly.
you talk as if you're just going after the tippy top. You can even use that
Yeah,
cutesy language. Let Bernie go whole hog. Be like, yo, we're just going to take it.
No, I actually like the idea, though. Tony Blair was like, I mean, look, it's ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about less than 0.5 of the population.
2%.
I mean, so you hear a lot of melodrama from places like Davos, Michael Bloomberg, but really, I mean, it's a very modest proposal.
I like the idea.
I actually like that. That would be if I ever run for office.
That's when Nathan Robinson runs for office. That's how he's going to talk.
Yeah.
I like the idea of very wealthy people trying to figure out how they're going to meet their wealth tax obligations each year. Like that'd be a fun little thing to put them through.
That would be beautiful.
Better sell some stuff, buddy.
Yeah, I guess so. So, and now here, or what's also funny is, ironically, for all of the like whining about charity, it would be like, I don't know, I guess you should give more tax deductible stuff away, right? Because that certainly impacts people who actually have to pay a chunk of their income in taxes, not just couch change. But the whole premise of this that is actually really amazing, this sound is relevant for it, is there is a conspiracy amongst a fraction of the population to go out and say that what they represent is the quote-unquote center of politics. Now, if we're being real, I would say if you took my politics, I actually think maybe terminology is going to be different, right? I don't know, people, you go into middle America and call themselves a socialist, all right? But I don't care about that as much. But I would actually say that most people, if you poll them and you get specific, they're on a they're ready to soak the rich, to say the least, to pay for things like Medicare for all. And while I do not think most Americans are reactionaries, I think that is a Republican phenomenon. I do think that they're probably more socially to the right than someone like me. And I think that, we can get into the details of what that even means. But I think it's a fair assumption, especially actually less so in arguments about like things with marriage equality, but maybe conversations about like immigration as an example. So I'm totally willing to have the intellectual honesty and stipulate that I think that there's a lot of areas in this country, like Medicare for all, where my views actually totally exemplify the mainstream and an emerging mainstream. And there's other areas where I have work to do to reconfigure politics in the direction I want. But if we looked at most mainstream, and there's a lot of polling that actually validates this. There was a 2016 research that was done on, I think it was released in the Washington Post. I don't remember which consortium did it. But basically, like, it's 4 grids, and there's a cluster of numbers in each of these grids that represent people on these social and economic spectrums, which is the usual dichotomy that they split people up to in these things. And on every part, 3 out of 4 parts of the grid, socially liberal and economically liberal, right-wing economically and right-wing socially. I might question what people actually mean by that when they answer that in a poll, but whatever, I'll nitpick about it later. All of these areas have a huge amount of, we have it right here. People, and this is bipartisan, are overwhelmingly in these grids amenable to a economic left argument. Though I don't really, this isn't great though, because we don't even know what these grids represent. They represent social identity dimension, most liberal to most conservative. Oh, okay. Say it on, Mike.
The y-axis is your social,
Okay.
and your x-axis is your economics.
Okay.
Conservative to the right and conservative up.
Okay, so as you can see, like normal people who identify as conservative, it's clustered in the social. That's why non-oligarchs vote for Republicans. It's white identity politics. We all know this. If you go into the lower right, which is the cluster that represents the, you might have never heard this before, but I'm a fiscal conservative and social liberal. Nobody is there. Okay? Like, this is a political dead zone. This is an abandoned strip mall. This is The Pretenders, the Ohio song about everything is gone, which Rush Limbaugh has scumbagly used for his bumper music. Nobody is there except for the most credentialed, overcompensated, socially and financially capitalized people in the country, which is why every time you turn on Morning Joe, every time you turn on some idiot cable news panel, every time you hear somebody trying to sound smart at some function, they go to, I'm socially liberal, fiscally conservative, which actually, like all these other things in the poll, doesn't mean anything. And sometimes you might meet a normal person on the street who says this, and then you drill it down, and they're going to be actually on to the left of economics, because some people just think it means like don't waste money. But when the elites say it, what they mean is, I think gay people are fine. I don't have a problem with abortion as long as I don't have to pay for it. And I want tax cuts now.
Yep.
And I want austerity.
Yeah,
That's what they mean. And there is no political constituency among non-elites for this in the country. None. And Waleed Shahid, but yet, who I was, and yet this is still like, this is the premise of Howard Schultz's candidacy. This is the premise of every single lazy, middle brow pundit hackery. It's still the easiest line to write in the world. There's even echoes of it in the new versions of this stuff, like Barry Weiss and the IDW. It's the easiest pseudo-intellectual hack line on the planet, and it's
Meghan McCain.
Meghan McCain, exactly. It's religious. I mean, it has, because it literally smacks data in the face. I'm like a data's disputable. Especially with politics, I'm not a quant guy. Because I just don't think you can really measure politics that way by and large. You can measure technical things, but not politics. But that being said, I mean, the fact that there is no constituency for this is as close to a sky is blue statement that you can make about political attitudes in the country across the board. Finally, someone is on cable news to say it, and that is Waleed Shahid. He is on Chris Hayes with Michelle Goldberg, and he explains why the billionaire centrists are the actual fringe group of American politics.
Howard Schultz and Michael Bloomberg and others, when they refer to the wealth tax, or when they talked about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's 70% marginal tax rate, it's like they don't even know how to argue against it, because their view is that it's self-evidently preposterous. But they clearly think it's good politics for them. Are they wrong, Waleed?
I mean, it's great for the progressive movement, the populist movement, and the Democratic Party to have people like Schultz and Bloomberg be the face of the anti-wealth tax campaign.
Yes, I think you're right about that.
But I mean, honestly, what's happening is that centrism typically refers to itself as the rational middle. Right. Really, it's a fringe movement trying to defend the economic preferences of the 1%. But right now, what we're seeing is that these corporate-friendly centrist politicians are incredibly out of touch with the Democratic Party electorate.
You see people on the left particularly talk about, Medicare for all polls so well, or a wealth tax polls so well, which is true. But that's also in like the untested chamber of combat, right? Like, those ideas are going to get flexed, and they're going to get frisked, and they're going to get worked over, and it's possible that they're not as popular after they have to be fought over as they are when they're abstractions.
I mean, look, right now in the polling, they are very popular, but
there was a time when repealing Obamacare was very popular. I want to be clear.
There's also been a time where Medicare was attacked by Ronald Reagan, yes, Barry Goldwater, and George H.W. Bush as being Soviet-style socialized medicine as socialism. There was a time when the Affordable Care Act was also attacked for being Soviet-style socialized medicine. We'll see the exact same attacks this time around. We're already seeing them, and I think we've overcome those challenges.
Although this is a little more fraught, right?
Okay, so just to say here, I mean, look, I'm not gonna, I think there's actually a good example of, like, don't freak out about Chris Hayes asking that question. That's a totally fine cable news question. But the Obamacare analogy is ridiculous, because the reason that the numbers flipped on Obamacare is it's basically like you live in a bad apartment, but it's 10 degrees outside, the heat kind of works, and the landlord sort of makes repairs occasionally. And the apartment sucks. And it should and can be a lot better. Then somebody comes along and says, I have a solution to your apartment problem. You're homeless tomorrow. Your perception of your apartment is going to increase radically. And again, I'll make this kind of visceral. I experienced evictions growing up. And I lived in plenty of places that weren't the worst places in the world, but they were very much nothing to write home about. And when you saw that letter on the door, you got to be gone, and the terror shoots through your body, your home became a lot more welcoming to you. So the poll switch on Obamacare is simply that Republicans came along and said, we're ready to repeal it. No more health care, you die. Add to which, particularly Trump, when he was running and lying, when he talked about replacing Obamacare, and again, with no specifics, blah, 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 but his talking points were to the left. He said, you keep your care, it gets better, nobody's uninsured. So obviously, which you're going to prefer that to getting forced into a subsidy system for bad private health plans. Add to wit, if you actually follow the Obamacare numbers to a logical conclusion, it's another argument for the popularity of left proposals.
I would like to see a similar chart for not just voters, but like constituencies that can influence the Democratic primary. Mm-hmm. Because I think they would look a bit different. And, you know, probably unfortunately for the left wing of the Democratic Party, wealthy suburban moderates did play a role in the midterms. Might not be the biggest role, but they played a role. And it makes me a little bit concerned that it's going to be a whole lot harder for a candidate like Bernie to win a Democratic primary than to win a general election.
I think that's true, though. I actually even think with so in my experience, this is anecdotal, but I mean, first of all, the numbers are there. That would be interesting if they expanded it to people who don't vote, but would be potential Democratic voters. But even with the way they do it now, there's nobody in that grid, as we saw from the numbers. And I would also say anecdotally, when I've talked to people that are more like in that suburban Democratic mold who might respond rhetorically to that line, when you get specific, they do support things like Medicare for all. Again, I really do think that the constituency of gay marriage is cool and we need to gut Medicare is really like Howard Schultz and Michael Bloomberg. And actually, honestly, people like Paul Ryan, there's another point Woz made. Like, yeah, Paul Ryan, if you got him off the record, he doesn't care about banning abortion. He doesn't care about harassing gay people. He cares about destroying what little is of a social safety net and increasing poverty and inequality in this country. That's what he's doing.
Well, I mean, one potentially good thing that Trump may have done is to destroy the alliance between the religious right and the free market neoliberals, free market capitalists, right?
He's at least showing how naked this and sort of opportunistic that alliance is. Right. Like,
yeah, you guys are right.
Like guys like Howard Schultz are, and how much the right, like Dave Rubin yesterday talking about this abortion stuff. Like they're that's their tack, right? Like the Democrats, they want to get rid of private insurance and they want to let you abort a baby right before it's born, and that's going to be their play for the next couple of years.
Yeah,
right.
I'm just concerned that the Republican Party is going to realign into this kind of national Bolshevism that people like Tucker Carlson and Ann Coulter are like all in for now, right? They're making some nods to like unions and the welfare state, and I don't know how sincere they are, but like it's powerful rhetoric, and it's already worked as rhetoric for Trump.
But where's the power at?
Yeah, where's the power? There's no one's going to fund that. That's why you see media personalities do it, and also why when Trump gets into office, he doesn't do any of it.
Well, no, he has no intention of doing it, but I think they are trying to put some kind of policy or intellectual heft behind it. And if the Republican Party at large picks up that kind of realignment, and it's a choice between like this national Bolshevism, social democracy in one country for white people, strong borders on the one hand, versus this like totally bankrupt, socially liberal, fiscally neoliberal Democratic Party, even if there's not a real constituency for that, like they've still got a whole lot of heft behind them, right? They've got Hollywood, they've got the mainstream media, they've got a ton of different moneyed interests in the political class. It seems like two very bad choices. It's like Le Pen versus Macron all over again.
I think they can make rhetorical moves toward it, but when they have to actually sign checks, I just don't think they're going to do it.
Yeah, I think that's the real, like the difference between, I mean, I think rhetorically it's super potent and dangerous, and it already does have a terrible effect on this country even, but yeah, the checks won't ever be cut. And the difference between, like, Le Pen can have that position in France because France already does have a actual social democracy that exists, and you don't need to rely on oligarchs to fund you in the same way there. So it's like, to me, you know, and it's also just evidenced by, could you name, again, not media figures, but any national Republican with a profile who's talking about income inequality and giving nods to labor unions?
I mean, not counting Tucker Carlson.
No,
and
but I'm
Coulter.
talking
Hello, this is
Trump.
Mitt Romney.
I mean, Trump talks about that stuff.
So Trump, right, but besides Trump, who again, because it has nothing to do with his policy except for his NAFTA negotiators, we heard, and you could think of him just as another media figure. So who else?
Yeah, I mean, nobody yet.
Hello, this is Mitt Romney.
Scared someone's going to come along. Who knows? Maybe Mitt Romney will have some kind of political awakening, and he'll be the
free
the
markets
candidate.
are immoral.
I just don't think.
I don't see it.
Any of the
for
Republican,
material reasons, actually.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like oligarchy, especially the oligarchy that's aligned with the Republicans, they're going to hear that and they're going to be like, well, who's going to get to put the toll? Who's going to own the tolls on all this infrastructure?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, it's possible that the same political and economic forces preventing the Democrats from realigning are also going to prevent the Republicans from realigning.
That's
They're even worse. And also, I don't know that the Democrats aren't realigning. I don't know if they are, but I don't know if they aren't. It's like, the thing is,
it's too early to tell, really.
Right, but there's actually a contest inside the Democratic Party right now. Inside the Republican Party, they're all doubled down on corporatism and white nationalism, and then you have a couple of media pundits that are exploiting the lane that you're talking about, but have no political power. So, you know, I think like the action is in the Democratic Party right now, and I agree with you that there's no guarantee that goes the right way at all, but it's in play. I mean, there's a reason that, I mean, contrary to what a lot of people who are, you know, weird on Twitter want to think, Bernie Sanders is still the most popular politician in the country. AOC is by far the most promising and dynamic politician in the country. So like, and that's it. Like that is both a signal of what works nationally and also the fighting line in the Democratic Party. And the last thing I'll add really quick before I get to you, Matt, is that I think it is actually really interesting that, you know, the establishment wing, for lack of a better word, they've got in Kamala Harris, they have an incredibly formidable, serious, you know, opponent and politician. But it's interesting to me that in the millennial cohort, there's no analog. Like all of the Ilhan Omar gets more and more progressive. Rashida Tlaib is a community organizer. AOC is the most prominent young politician in the country. Could you, I mean, I guess you could say, I don't know, Connor Lamb, people paid attention. Who?
Buttigieg, or whatever his name is.
Oh, from
But he's
Indiana.
only interesting because he like wrote a dissertation on Bernie Sanders in 2002.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't even know if Buttigieg, I think Buttigieg is probably, and also I don't even know if he's third way. And he's obviously, the only reason he's trying to get national, we said it the other day, is because
well, if it's a comparison to Kamala Harris, I think he's in that lane.
Is he though, policy wise?
I think so. Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly
we'll
don't
see.
know enough
I think it's unclear which way he's going to bend. I think if he's smart, he would endorse Green New Deal and Medicare for all.
Definitely.
And
for what it's worth, he isn't. I mean,
who's not endorsing those policies though right now?
But
there's a way you can endorse them, and you can. And I mean, Beto.
Sure.
But you can, what I'm
he's
saying is like even that being said, he's not a fraction as important as AOC is, whatever way he goes.
That's what I'm saying.
Right?
Like
there is no analog just in terms of like talent and importance.
Third Way likes to quote these stats that there was as many moderates elected in 2018 as there were, left-wing progressives.
Right.
But guess what? Nobody can name a single one of them.
And again, and also some of them, like at least the way Connor Lamb campaigned, and of course I have strong disagreements with this, but Connor Lamb campaigned as I'm pro-gun, anti-abortion, and was like union made, union hall, union. So it was like, okay, there's your moderate. He's the opposite of everything you're shilling for corporations every day in Washington.
I don't want to be a doomsayer, and I don't pretend to know what's going to happen in the future. But I do think
Jeff does.
Like
He pretends
Tucker
to know
Carlson,
what happens in the future.
Future Jeff.
Yes.
Tucker Carlson's really smart, and we shouldn't underestimate his ilk.
Well, this is how Republican politics operates, right? They have no ideas of their own, and then they come in, wait to shit on Democrat ideas, and then roll things back.
Well, it's fascist opportunism. Opportunism.
That's what's so scary about them. They're total chameleons.
Yeah, they're lying in wait right now.
No values.
See what happens.
Cliff Oh. All right. I will read this because you got me. Hey, Michael, how's John Cusack doing? Never mind. I just wanted to call attention to my name, which was Cliff Stivinkter. I do always reward immaturity in this show. All right. Well, let's do 2 more quick pieces of sound, and then we're gonna bring Jeff out here because I want Jeff here for the Bernie sound. I think he'll enjoy it. You know how I always say when I do my Rachel Maddow impression, I go, Russia, 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 Russia. Russia, Russia, Russia. Now,
dead on.
It's actually horrifyingly dead on. And I am not. I mean, we stipulate this every single show. Talking about the projection of Russian policy and its own Monroe Doctrine in Eastern Europe and its use of politicians like Gerhard Schroeder, and yes, even in fact, in a place where it can, its occasional threats around the energy distribution to a place like Germany. I mean, these are valid conversation topics. They shouldn't be the main conversation in the United States because we are in the seat of our own empire, and that should frankly be our first and foremost piece of attention. And people are also hysterical and ridiculous and filled with nonsense conspiracy theories about Russia. But I don't make any, I have no, Russia's a mid-rank imperial power. I'm totally not impressed. And there's plenty of things to critique and talk about there. There is a coup going on in Venezuela. That coup is backed with the threat force of the United States. Guaido was given a op-ed piece in the New York Times. And Maduro, while giving some very good signals on negotiations, is definitely deploying secret police and engaging in brutality. These are all happening simultaneously. And people hate whenever I outline broad reality like that. But the bottom line is, and the still simple takeaway is we need to oppose coups, and we need to oppose imposing a right-wing government in Venezuela, which will have all of the problems that currently exist without any remnants of the accomplishments of Chavez, and we need to support diplomacy. And I would say that, Rachel Maddow, who actually, I didn't read the book, but supposedly she wrote a book several years ago on the military-industrial complex and U.S.-based systems abroad. I mean, I don't know what to say. I would imagine that, this would be something that I'm sure she understands. She's obviously a very smart person. But I find, her fear-mongering and inness on Russia is, this one stood out. This is Rachel Maddow last night talking about Russia and the energy grid.
And it is like negative 50 degrees in the Dakotas right now. What would happen if Russia killed the power in Fargo today? Right? What would happen if all the natural gas lines that service Sioux Falls just poofed on the coldest day in recent memory, and it wasn't in our power whether or not to turn them back on? I mean, what would you do if you lost heat indefinitely as the act of a foreign power on the same day the temperature in your front yard matched the temperature in Antarctica? I mean, what would you and your family do?
I download the MSNBC app.
I would call Adam Schiff's office.
I would call Adam. Yeah, I would.
Please save me, Adam.
I would say, my power's going down. Get this tweet to Ted Lieu. I want him to ratio Trump.
This is some serious Glenn Beck vibes going on here.
I mean, yeah. And so, and look, and just what is extraordinary to me is like, okay, first of all, there are problems in the energy grid which we need to deal with. What if you actually had a rational conversation about Russia for a second? And you said that Russia, just like the United States, is an adversarial power. So, and interferes in other people's domestic affairs and elections in a much smaller degree, mostly than we do, because they just don't have the capacity to do the amount that we do. But as an example, could Russia, to one of its immediate neighbors, or potentially even to Germany, where it does have a very large part of its natural gas, could it turn off the tap and like just a raw exercise of political power? Probably not to Germany. There's too many stakes in that to do that. Maybe to a regional neighbor in its sort of own mini sphere of influence and imperialism, which we should oppose, just as we should oppose, again, something that I don't ever hear Rachel talking about, like U.S. supporting a coup in Honduras. She didn't ask Hillary Clinton about that. She's not talking about what we're doing in Venezuela, which far exceeds even if all of the conspiracy theories about Russian interference in 2016 are true. And then let's just get real politique for a second. I can understand why. I'm not evaluating the truth of any of these claims. I'm just saying, like, if you told me, hey, Russia would like to have a president in the White House that backs its agenda and is friendly with its oligarch class, I would say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The same way that the United States would like a regime in Russia that supports deregulation, its oligarch class, like we did in the 1990s in Russia when we literally brought the life expectancy rate down from lower than the Soviet era. Okay? That makes sense. Why the fuck would Russia wake up tomorrow and decide, in an unbelievably provocative act with another nuclear superpower, to just turn off the energy grid to fuck with old people in the Dakotas? What strategic basis would they have for doing that? Now, maybe they are going to say because they don't want us to invade Venezuela. And there's some, I don't know. I mean, but even the most bellicose voices in Russia have suggested a repeat of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is put a flotilla in front of Russia and say, in front of Venezuela, and say no. And Putin hasn't. By the way, the Russians have been rhetorical, but they actually haven't really put any muscle behind Venezuela at all. So, like, just even like, again, if you stipulated all the conspiracy theories and you stipulated all of this stuff, why the fuck would Russia do that? I understand why they would steal data. I understand why they would interfere with elections. I understand all of that. Why? Other than just massively pissing off a country that could, by the way, certainly do similar things to them, to say the least. And the payoff would be you by the way, and if Trump's a secret Russian agent, you do it in the Dakotas, you would kill some like MAGA heads, most likely.
Yeah, you're going to make a lot of MAGA guys turn into resistance.
Yeah.
Russia.
I know. I mean, is that the real conspiracy? Does Rachel Maddow want more MAGA people watching her show?
It's the liberal version of QAnon.
That just
it really
fucking
is
wild. Like that just doesn't even make it, that just even within its own universe. No, but you know how like in script writing you talk about
QAnon doesn't make sense either.
It makes sense in its own universe, totally.
The difference,
absolutely.
The one difference is that QAnon's optimistic. Like we're all going to be saved. This is
right.
Like around the corner. The pet like paranoia we have is going to get us. Like.
Well, they need a lens through which to understand the world, and they don't have Marxism.
And they did this, by the way, and there was
Russia.
a debunked story a couple years ago after Trump got into office about one in Vermont. It was just debunked. That was the thing that people ran with for a couple of days. They took down a power grid in Vermont, and it turned out to be like, it was hacked. It was hacked. It's the Russians. It was like, no, it turned out to be electrical failure because, by the way, America's whole grid, like, is a disaster that we have not invested in decades. That's why we literally have bridges collapsing. So that's another thing to say, too, about all this Russia stuff. It's like, even if everything is true, what kind of poisoned immune system in the United States is Russia able to exploit? An immune system of corruption, inequality, racism, and yes, a totally failed electric grid, which Rachel Maddow could do one of her, like, it was 1974 on the PG&E company, that would be great. Why don't you do 20 minutes about how Republicans and Democrats have totally failed to upgrade our our infrastructure, and the next president needs to do that. I bet you could come up with some amazing wonky questions to ask the candidates on MSNBC. But instead we go to Putin's just sitting there like, well, Trump give me all the meeting notes from his meetings, and the next step is I want to kill people in North Dakota with power grid.
Even the conspiracy theories on the right are more inspiring than in the radical center.
All right, here's what we're gonna do. Let's bring Jeff from Georgia out. You don't want him to sit next to you?
Well, the camera's set up.
Camera set. Well, why don't you just push here? Just do what I do when there's a guest, which is just push that chair over, and put my mic in front of you. No, Jeff, just get right there. Just get right there in front of that mic. Yeah, stay right there. And then just push that one over. No, you got to get in that chair, Jeff. Push that one over. All right, folks. Jeff, get that mic in front of you. And hit the button. So you already have that on, not on push to talk, right? Oh, it is? Okay, go underneath it.
Hail and well met.
Okay, that works. All right. Jeff, dissident peasant, how are you?
I am fantastic. I just arrived in LaGuardia, I guess a few hours ago. There's a whole soup of us coming here to see your show, Michael, of course, which we're all thrilled about. I just want to say before I forget, and this is like kind of sappy, and I was saying this before, this is my favorite group of shows. Majority Report, Antifada, Team BS, whatever Matt's show's name is. Literary Hangover, of course. All of them are great. I love them. I fell in love with Sam and Michael and Matt Bender when he was here a long time ago. And so it is really a dream, literally a dream come true to be in this room with these.
Oh, awesome, man!
With these people, I couldn't be more thrilled to be here.
Awesome. How is? By the way, is this the first time you've ever been in New York?
I visited once. I think when I was like 13. So that's literally over 20 years ago now, and obviously I was like 13, so I wasn't really.
Got some trouble.
Yeah, exactly. I was pretty much being minded by my church choir director the whole time.
Well, welcome. Let's play this vintage Bernie Sanders sound because I think Jeff will enjoy being in on this one. Do you want to maybe, Brendan, I guess you could just put the speaker on so Matt could hear it because I know
what it is.
Oh, you know what it is. Matt knows what it is. Yes. All right, so there's a weird account on Twitter. I don't know who's behind this weird account.
I don't know that we need to say.
No, I'm not going to say what it is. Telling him where this person's coming from. I'm not going to say the name of the account. My point is there's a lot of theories about it, and the most persuasive theory I've heard is from Brendan Sutton, pretty bad lefty, which is that it's Bernie's comms director, who is unearthing brilliant clips that show that Bernie's had consistent positions for a long time.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, maybe they're just trying to get this all out before he announces. And also make him look awesome. Awesome. This is Bernie Sanders. He was running for governor of Vermont in 1986, and he explains why he's a socialist.
America's the socialist mayor of Burlington, America's socialist mayor. Are you a socialist?
Yes.
Why are you running as an independent?
Well, the same reason that Mrs. Kunin and Mr. Smith are parts of the capitalist economic system. They're not running as capitalists, they're running as Democrats and Republicans. Socialism, to me, means democracy with a small d. I am not affiliated with a political party. I am an independent who happens to be a socialist. I am outraged about the system that we're living in, when you have corporations and millionaires and billionaires dominating the entire society. And as a socialist, I want to see a radical redistribution of wealth and power in this country so the average working person, the average farmer, the average woman has a fair shake. We're not getting that. Socialism, to me, is a philosophy, but I'm not affiliated with any particular socialist party.
That's begging to be made into a Thug Life meme video. And let me just also say really briefly, for people who concern trolled in 2016 about him calling himself a socialist and saying like, oh, well, why not just, use a less threatening word or blah, blah, blah. And I'm actually, I'm not invested in verbiage arguments mostly, but that's a pretty great example of why it's great that he's been steady with his Democratic Socialist self-designation, because that's who he is. You're never going to be able to ace him on a video like that because it's steady state.
I mean, I just love how he talks about democracy. I've long thought that that's something in America we've long lost, and we've never really had it fully for everyone. We know this, but the idea that we have a decision to make, how are we going to do it? Should it be the guy with the gun who decides? Should it be the guy who says God tells him that he has the right way? No, let's skip all that. The best way is probably to vote on it, right? Like, generally speaking, like, this is how sophisticated humans make decisions in advanced political bodies. And Bernie Sanders is talking about socialism in a way that, I mean, it at least resonates with me, because I love the idea of expanding democracy to all people.
No doubt.
Yeah, and expanding democracy to the workplace, too. Like, most people can't vote on what their boss does. How cool would that be?
That would be
very cool.
That would be delicious. You're calling from a 708 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Michael and crew. This is Dragonflayer 19 calling from the supposed heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA.
You have arrived. Welcome to Brooklyn. Is this your first time in New York?
It's not my first time in New York, though I will admit I am a bit lost, because your guys don't really have like this body of water with like a celestial body in it, which is really helpful for me in Chicago. So
Wait, when you say celestial body, is that a joke that refers to a certain prediction by a certain potentially crypto-fascist person?
Indeed, yes.
Okay.
If everybody doesn't know, there's currently a polar vortex in the Midwest, and that's literally because of the overflow of water from Lake Michigan just sweeping across the entire Midwest, freezing everything in its path.
So that is actually pretty ironic. Well, welcome to Brooklyn. Do you have anything else to share with us?
Yes, two quick things. So first off, as yourself and Jeff alluded to, there are a bunch of leftist vest fans in New York right now. So if anybody wants to hang out, do stuff, go to the live show, please contact myself, Dragonflayer19 on Twitter, or Dissident Pheasant on Twitter, or Kentucky Fried Comrade on Twitter, so that we can organize that, because solidarity with comrades and all that.
Awesome. Great. Okay. Second thing.
On a slightly lighter note, I would like to talk about Kamala Harris 2020.
Okay. Yes. Go ahead.
So when people are arguing about Kamala Harris and stuff, one of the things you need to like really focus on is like, especially with people who like aren't necessarily as political as we are, is like focusing on stuff like democratic values. Like you should show people those two videos that are going around and like ask them like, is this a person that should be representing the Democrats? Like, should we be a party of like carceral education, like punitive education? Because that's what that her stance on education is it's punitive. Like, you should be punished for not going and like literally go to jail. Like, that's literal prison or school to prison pipeline right there.
Very literal.
And also like another like I think like somewhat like under appreciated point in that other video where she's talking about like she's like being very elitist and condescending about protesting and like being an activist.
Yep.
Did anybody like notice in 2017, 2018 that we literally had like millions of people protesting, holding up little signs like less jails, more education, my body, my right.
I just want to say really briefly, just literally 1 sec, just because it's apropos, and I guess we missed this call on this, but Romind, he has it with an O, a zero instead of an O. But he said, I got disconnected, but just to let you know that Lyft and Juno lawsuits stopped increase of ride shares in New York City is set. Basically, Lyft and Juno drivers are talking about doing a strike in New York. So just feeding exactly what you guys are talking about.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, and like also like you just have like all those like teacher strikes, like literally trying to secure more funds for their students because like that's what they care about. So like it's amazing like how out of touch like that clip is, where Kamala's like just basically saying like, hey, you guys aren't sophisticated, you aren't nuanced on this issue.
Right.
I, this prosecutor who has nothing to do with education, I understand it more than you, person who has a sign in your closet.
And it's the same thing with the NAFTA ease that Lori Wallach said. Don't ever trust somebody. Look, I'm not saying obviously there's things to learn, and sometimes there really are subtleties. But as a basic premise, if some lawmaker or a corporate sector person tells you like, oh, this is just your basic moral objection and ability to do some basic analysis on something doesn't match my sophistication or technical expertise, they're scamming you. It's bullshit. Don't listen.
They want you to think that it's too complex for you to understand.
Yes, and it's not.
Yeah.
I appreciate okay.
And
yeah, real quick, please.
Just one final point on this. Is the other thing you have to understand is like when a lot of these people are like deploying those like points about how like, oh, she had to be like, you know, tougher because of like the work environment, and like this is like the path that like, you know, women of color and stuff had to take in order to, you know, succeed in this environment. Like that's just an insulting talking point, because one, what you're saying is that instead of like the person who like once they get that power, like actually works and makes the system better to like make it so that like the next generation of people like you are able to actually participate and like be a part of the system, instead of doing that, she's just propping up that same system that supposedly she had to be tough in order to enter into.
I want to just give a slight tweak on that, right? Because I think you're right substantively, but there's no question, just again, this is just like an objective fact, that when she was coming up in politics, and first of all, this is a really short time frame. Everybody had to have some version of talking tough on crime, quote unquote tough on crime, buying into that bullshit. Now, and that's going to implicate every single candidate. Every candidate, including Sanders, has had a bad vote on this, and most candidates have had bad rhetoric. Biden and Harris stand in their own category because Biden wrote the crime bill and Harris put people in jail for nonviolent crimes. So that's its own category as far as I'm concerned. But there's nothing wrong with acknowledging the reality that when she was rising in politics, there was no question that that was a smart calculation, and some might even consider quote unquote necessary. But the flip side where I think there's validity is that some people are, to make that point and say there shouldn't be double standards in criticizing her is valid and important. But when people make the argument more broadly to essentially say that this is somebody who can't even be assessed as a public figure, that is condescending. That is essentialist. And that is actually, condescending and essentialist, because I'm going to say, look, I understand the racial and gender dynamics that are specific to Kamala Harris. And I also recognize that she's an incredibly talented politician and one of the front runners. And so therefore, I take her extremely seriously. And taking any candidate seriously means taking their record seriously. And that's where the record speaks for itself. It's a disturbing record, to say the least.
Can I ask a quick question before you go? Have you managed to have any tasty New York pizza yet?
Boom.
I have not.
Because I tried your pizza when I was in Chicago. Unlike some people in this room, I did try the Chicago pizza.
I did not. I stuck to good food in Chicago. Yep.
Yes, that is one of my missions, is to peer into that like coastal elitist cultural Marxist viewpoint on pizza. I will try it, and I will probably dismiss it, but that is one of my plans.
Dragon, thanks a million for the call, and see you tomorrow. All right, we're going to play one more piece of sound and take one more call and a few more IMs, and we'll get out of here. All right, this is Mitch McConnell, who was completely out of sight the whole time he was allowing Donald Trump to shut down the federal government in a desperate act of theater and racism. Corey Robin had a great tweet recently. He said, look, people should really take in the fact that Trump tried to make the midterms a referendum on white nationalism, and he lost. And he tried to make the government shutdown on white nationalism, and he lost. That's really important to internalize in terms of aggressiveness.
And what you view about the American public.
And what you view about the American public, indeed. This is Mitch McConnell, who's put his head back out there. Yup, it's a turtle joke. And he is going to mock. Keep in mind, I mean, federal workers had to take out loans. They had to take out same-day loans. The pawn shop business surged. People were missing payments on things. Serious human suffering that Mitch McConnell has zero connection to and has spent his whole life, his whole career in public office, increasing. Here he is mocking those people who work more in a day, or contribute, I should say. Mitch McConnell does a lot of work. Contribute to the good more in a day than he has in his whole career of harming people.
Their bill would make Election Day a new paid holiday for government workers and created an additional brand new paid leave benefit for up to 6 days for any federal bureaucrat who decides they'd like to hang out at the polls during any election. Just what America needs, another paid holiday and a bunch of government workers being paid to go out and work. I assume our colleagues on the other side, on their campaigns. This is the Democrat plan to restore democracy? A brand new week of paid vacation for every federal employee who'd like to hover around while you cast your ballot?
Oh, man, he's really on that right-wing 90s talk show bullshit. So the context I give was mocking the suffering of government workers. But, of course, what he's doing there is propagandizing against an excellent piece of legislation that Democrats have introduced in the House to try to address voter suppression and entrench democracy in the United States, which is one of the most urgent issues we face. And look, all of these abstractions and dumb conversations that people get into, and we saw this the other day. The actor from Empire was assaulted in Chicago, and they tried to put a noose on his neck. And people said there was literal reports saying racially charged and possibly homophobic attack. Tinged. The inability in this country to call things what they are is horrifying and disgusting and ridiculous and delusional. But there is another way in which it's like, you don't have to get into any arguments about anything other than to say one major political party has gutted the Voting Rights Act and opposes legislation to make it easier for everybody to vote. Therefore, whatever the justification, whatever the conspiracy theory, whatever the nonsense, they are a white supremacist party because of that action, period. And for most of them, it's strategic. I would actually totally stipulate with you that a fair number of these people don't have any personal animus in the way that people like to narrowly define racism. Mm-hmm. I think certainly people in the Trump administration do, but I'm sure if you talk to staffers who work for maybe even someone like Mitch McConnell, I don't think they have that in that narrow definition. But they are apartheidists because their policy set is voter suppression, and it doesn't matter what the motivation or the conspiracy theory is. And that's it. That ends the conversation. Yeah. There's nothing else to add to that.
Yeah, we really need to expand the definition of racism or white supremacy from like this individual conscious animus to something that is structural that you can uphold without even realizing it. And that can expand to
But this is
Democrats
even short
as
of
well.
that. This is short of that. This is like, this is an action. Because I agree with you to an extent, for sure, but that can get complicated in some ways. That's like an important, it's like you get into the realm, like I was saying, where it's like 100% of white people are racist because we're encultured in a certain way. And probably if we made the distinction of like group identities and whatever, like everybody has identity affiliations, and all of that is important, and all of that needs to be hacked through and dealt with. But on a really basic level, the middle ground of pushing the debate between like, hey, I don't personally use slurs and want to discriminate against people versus like, yes, but you are supporting legislation to build a fucking wall, to put children in cages and to block people from voting.
I mean, that's
Therefore,
what I'm saying. You have to look at the outcome of a policy. And if the outcome of a policy upholds white supremacy, that policy is a white supremacist policy.
Right. And for what it's worth, conversely, you know, if you have whatever personal beliefs you have, I'm not impressed. I'm not happy about it. But if you're voting and legislating and doing the right thing, I don't particularly care, frankly.
Yeah.
That's like that's where it is. I don't care.
Can I just say really briefly that for anyone working for a living, whether they're working for Uncle Sam or not, this demonization of paid time off for them is really funny to me.
Yep.
I actually tend to know that the United States population is one of the most overworked and miserable at their jobs in the world. And it's not just because we all have crappy jobs. It's also we work too often at them. And we don't make enough, but that's another story. I mean, literally almost any excuse for just giving anybody a holiday. And what could be more important than Election Day? Well, we all love democracy here, right? Or do we?
In a certain sense. Wu-Tang Clan, please stop when a caller is talking over you and moving the goalposts. Just hang up on them. I will do that from now on. I wanted to give Isha a call because she had clearly taken in a lot of content, but yes, I will stop doing that. And I appreciate, by the way, because a lot of people get very whiny about how tough I am on callers, but I appreciate some reaffirmation of a little bit of fucking tight ship around here. All right. Speaking of which, let's take the final call of the day. You're calling from a 516 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Better be good.
Better be good. Thank you, Jeff.
Hey, is this me?
This is you.
Hey, it's Steve from Brooklyn.
Sorry, say that again.
I'm ski, SKI, like the sport.
Okay.
Basketball.
From Brooklyn?
From Brooklyn, yeah.
Speak into your phone. You're going in and out. Just speak clearly.
I get really bad reception in my apartment.
Okay, well, you're good now.
Can you hear me better now?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. One, this is kind of a side question, but did you ever work at Al Jazeera? Because we're somehow connected on LinkedIn. If you want to say I could ever think of us being connected?
No.
It's kind of a weird side question.
I mean, I've been on Al Jazeera a bunch, but I've never worked there. No. I did see a conspiracy theory once that I'm an Al Jazeera operative. That was cool. But no, I never worked there. All right. We're going to need to upgrade this phone call here.
So my actual question is this.
Do not ask questions like that in calls for future reference, my friends. Okay, what's the question? Yes.
My actual question is, since you introduced me to Dave Rubin's subreddit, which is fantastic, is it more or less possible that the whole him leaving Patreon over Sargon is really just a ruse that him and Peterson and some of the other IDW idiots came up with, really as a way to grift more money out of the system? Because it sort of seems like that
would be definitely my very heavy guess. And also I want to just say, to be clear here, and I'm not being vague about this on purpose. I really have no idea, but I don't like, in general, the proposition of people saying like, I want a platform that's like a right-wing Patreon or a left-wing Patreon, I don't have a problem with. Like, I don't think like, there's nothing necessarily, Patreon certainly worked very well for me, but like, I don't have any, there's nothing wrong with there being a marketplace in that space. But I mean, yes, look, I would say every time you hear some sanctimonious nonsense from those people, always look at what the business angle is. 100%.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call, man.
Yeah,
Sorry,
when we
folks,
leave
can't get the rest of
Patreon,
your
it's
calls.
going to be because we want to keep more of our money, not because we're pretending to be persecuted for our ideology.
I think that's really what they want. They want to make that percentage on the top, as well as get their.
That would just do. It was really hard to keep going after Sargon was taken off. It's like the distinction. I'm not going to relitigate this, but like what I actually found really funny was like some people who like criticize people like Matt and I for raising like longer term concerns about this with like any type of actual like, oh, I'm so worried about Sargon. Yeah. Like, get the fuck out of here.
I would suggest or caution that. I think they probably all have lost a fair amount of money in the short term on this. I think this might be more strategic than about like short term monetary.
Oh no, I'm saying no. I think there could be another. Look, setting up your own business is a smart long-term decision. That is strategic.
But there's a degree of risk to what they're doing, I guess is what I'm saying.
There's definitely a degree of risk to what they're doing. That's
like
fair.
To see how much money that they left on the table, it's funny.
I don't know about Peterson, but I think Rubin's got a pretty nice cushion that he's not worried about.
I have no clue.
Peterson's still at the top of the New York Times best-selling list, so he's
But you're right.
Furious.
There's no doubt that they're leaving a lot of money on the table. That's important. And
it's our job to make sure their new venture fails.
All right, Thames Darwin. Hey, Michael, when people call in and defend, or at least soft pedal Hindutva and cite Pakistan, the reason, maybe remind them that Pakistan's very existence was at least partially the result of pro-Hindutva forces in the 1940s. Of course. And I don't know. I try to give people who call from, who have a particular background directed to the place, more of the benefit of the doubt. But like, yeah, Isha, you got to do better. At least with me on these, or maybe not even that. We just have disagreements. I just don't support right-wing nationalist politics of any variety. Full stop.
What if they have orphanages?
I was going to make a joke about how we should argue more about stuff. Let's argue more about stuff that happened on TMBS, but I actually do think this is an important topic.
Well, it's an important topic, but it's an important topic to like actually get ground on versus just be all over the place and name a bunch of things that most people don't know. And yes, a lot of goalpost shifting. Like, I don't want to. Yes, like if we're talking about Tulsi Gabbard and BJP, and there's no analog, bringing up Congress Party in the 80s is ridiculous. Like, I was glad to give a little history lesson, but it's really off topic. All right. Let's see. 3 more IMs. Buried Weiss. Nice tracksuit, Misha, but shouldn't you be squatting and eating sunflower seeds? See you tomorrow. Well, see you tomorrow. And how do you know that I don't squat and eat sunflower seeds? Asshole from Westchester. Don't drag me into this Howard Schultz thing. I'm voting for Warren. Well, then you're definitely not the kind of asshole from Westchester that I was talking about.
Not all Westchesters.
Oh, yes. We need to tweet this out. Fuck. I wish I could send this to you, Brendan. Hey, folks, this should be the last IM of the day. Brock from VA. Hey, MR, today's the last day to vote for Lula for the Nobel Peace Prize. We need about 400K to meet the petition goal. Can you guys share this link? Yes, I'll be sharing it all over my social media. It's important. No other president in the 21st century took 40 million people out of poverty and eliminated hunger in a country and is a political prisoner. All right, everybody, 6 o'clock tonight, TMBS on the Michael Brooks Show live stream. And we are all back here live tomorrow. Jeff, tell everybody to close out where they can find your stuff and all that good stuff.
Oh, thank you. If people are interested in what I produce, which is not nearly as good as the fine people surrounding me, but I do my best.
Oh, stop it.
You can go to distantpeasant.com. I post everything there first. If you want to support me, of course, it's at patreon.com/distantpeasant. You can check out everything I do there. I talk a little bit about a lot of things, a lot of history, some contemporary politics, and some fun stuff, too. If you like sitcoms, you can go check out my latest episode. Thanks, Michael.
Jeff from Georgia!
Yeah, I was going to say, where is, you gotta hit us a little.
I got to tell you, man, I love the sound of that horn. Warms the cockles in my heart.
All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the rope that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive